In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and people moved with purpose, there was a quiet billionaire who preferred solitude over socializing. His name was Daniel Hawthorne, a man known for building an empire from scratch, but also for keeping his life private. Unlike other billionaires who loved flashing their wealth on yachts or private jets, Daniel liked simplicity. He had a small corner cafe he frequented when he needed to escape the noise of his high-stakes world. On this particular afternoon, Daniel sat at his usual spot, sipping espresso while glancing out the window. The cafe buzzed with chatter businessmen, discussing deals, tourists snapping photos, and baristas shouting orders. But something unusual caught Daniel's eye. At a table nearby, a couple seemed to be having a heated argument. What made it stand out wasn't just the raised voices. It was the way one person towered over the other, both physically and emotionally. The woman looked about in her late 20s, visibly pregnant, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Her face was flushed red, not from embarrassment alone, but from exhaustion too. She tried to speak softly, almost pleadingly, but her words were drowned out by the man sitting across from her. He wore an expensive suit that screamed success, but his demeanor told a different story. His voice sliced through the air like a knife, sharp and cruel. "You're useless," he spat, leaning forward. "How hard is it to get anything right? You're nothing but a burden." Every word felt heavier than the last, landing on the woman like bricks. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't fight back. Instead, she stood up hesitantly, clutching her stomach protectively as if shielding her unborn child from the storm brewing around them. Other customers stole quick glances, some shaking their heads, others pretending not to notice. No one stepped in. It was easier to look away than to confront such raw ugliness. But Daniel couldn't look away. Something about the scene gnawed at him. Maybe it was the way the woman's shoulders slumped under the weight of her husband's words. Or maybe it was how the man's eyes gleamed not with anger, but with satisfaction, as though breaking her spirit gave him power. Whatever it was, Daniel found himself gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He hated bullies, especially those who preyed on the vulnerable. As the woman hurried toward the exit, the man called after her, his tone mocking. "Don't forget, we're meeting Dr. Carter tomorrow. Try not to embarrass me again." She nodded silently, pulling her coat tighter around herself before disappearing into the crowded street outside. The man stayed behind, finishing his coffee as if nothing had happened. Daniel watched him carefully now, studying every move. There was something off about this guy, something calculated beneath the polished exterior. He reminded Daniel of the kind of people he encountered in boardrooms, the ones who smiled sweetly while plotting your downfall. And yet, here he was, using that same charm to crush someone defenseless. That night, Daniel lay awake in his penthouse apartment, staring at the ceiling. The image of the pregnant woman haunted him. He wondered what her life must be like, trapped with someone who treated her like property instead of a partner. Was she safe? Did anyone else know what she was going through? Most importantly, could he do something about it? Daniel wasn't the type to meddle in strangers' affairs. In fact, he prided himself on staying detached. But there was something about this situation that felt wrong on a gut level. Maybe it was because he'd seen enough cruelty in his own life to recognize it when it stared him in the face. Or maybe it was because deep down he wished someone had intervened when he was younger, during the times when he felt powerless himself. Whatever the reason, Daniel decided he couldn't let this go. The next morning, he picked up his phone and then dialed a number he hadn't used in years. On the other end, a familiar voice answered. "It's Daniel," he said simply. "I need your help with something delicate." By the end of the call, Daniel had set a plan in motion. He didn't know yet where it would lead or what exactly he hoped to achieve. All he knew was that he couldn't sit idly by while someone suffered in silence. Little did he realize this decision would spiral into events that would shock everyone involved and change lives forever. The next day, Daniel sat in his sleek office, staring at the files spread across his desk. The private investigator he'd hired had already started digging into the couple's life, and the initial reports were unsettling. As Daniel read through the documents, a picture began to emerge, one far darker than he'd imagined. The man from the cafe wasn't just verbally abusive, he was a master manipulator. According to the pie, he controlled every aspect of his wife's existence, down to the smallest detail. Her bank accounts? Frozen. Her credit cards? Canceled without her knowledge. Even her phone calls were monitored. She had no access to her own money, despite coming from a wealthy family herself. It turned out that her trust fund, a sizable inheritance meant to secure her future, had been siphoned off by him under the guise of investments. But these so-called investments didn't exist. They were cleverly disguised transfers into offshore accounts that only he could access. What struck Daniel most was how methodical it all seemed. This wasn't just a bad marriage, it was a calculated scheme designed to strip her of power and independence. And now, with her pregnancy, things were escalating. The pie uncovered text messages between the husband and his lawyer discussing plans to leave her once the baby was born. He intended to frame her as emotionally unstable, using her supposed inability to cope as leverage to gain full custody of their child. It was cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He wasn't new to seeing greed or corruption. In fact, he encountered it daily in his line of work, but this felt different. This wasn't about business deals gone wrong or corporate espionage. This was personal. This was someone tearing apart another human being piece by piece, leaving them broken and powerless. He thought about the woman again, the way she'd stood there in the cafe, clutching her stomach, trying desperately to hold herself together while the world crumbled around her. He wondered if she even realized the extent of what was happening. Did she know her own money was being stolen? Did she suspect the plans her husband was making behind her back? Or had he worn her down so much that she believed she deserved it? Daniel couldn't shake the image of her tear-streaked face. He'd spent years building walls around himself, keeping people at arm's length because he didn't want to get dragged into messy situations. Yet here he was, unable to walk away. Something inside him refused to let this go. Maybe it was guilt for all the times he'd ignored injustices because they didn't affect him directly. Or maybe it was empathy, remembering moments from his own past when he'd felt trapped and voiceless. Whatever it was, Daniel knew he had to act. But how? Confronting the husband outright would be reckless. If word got out that a billionaire was meddling in their lives, it could make things worse for the woman. Legal action might take too long, and by then, it could be too late. He needed a strategy, a careful, calculated plan that would dismantle the husband's control without putting her in further danger. Daniel met with the pie again. They went over the evidence meticulously, piecing together timelines and connections. Every document, every transaction, every email was scrutinized until they had a clear roadmap of the husband's misdeeds. Armed with this information, Daniel began crafting his next move. But before he could proceed, he knew he had to talk to her. Not as a billionaire swooping in to save the day, but as someone who genuinely cared. He wanted to give her a choice, to show her the truth and let her decide what to do with it. After all, this wasn't his life to fix. It was hers. And if she chose to fight back, he would stand beside her every step of the way. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe, far from Fafrum, the one where Daniel had first witnessed the altercation. She arrived hesitantly, glancing around as though expecting trouble. When she saw him, her expression shifted from confusion to caution. "Why did you ask me here?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield. Daniel smiled, gently, trying to put her at ease. "I saw what happened the other day," he began, "and I wanted to help." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she looked like she might bolt. "Help? Why would you care about someone like me?" "Because no one deserves to be treated the way you were," Daniel replied firmly. "And because I think you're stronger than you realize." She lowered her gaze, tears welling up in her eyes. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, she nodded, giving him permission to continue. Slowly, carefully, Daniel laid out everything the PI had uncovered. The stolen money, the fake investments, the custody plans. Each revelation hit her like a punch to the gut, but instead of crumbling, she straightened her spine, determination flickering in her eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. I thought I was losing my mind, that I was failing somehow." "You're not failing," Daniel assured her. "You've been manipulated, but we can change that. Together." Over the next hour, they discussed options. Daniel offered to help her reclaim her assets, file legal protections, and create a safe space where she could start rebuilding her life. At first, she hesitated, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. But as they talked, hope began to replace fear. By the end of their conversation, she agreed to let him help, but on one condition. "I don't want you doing this out of pity," she said firmly. "If we're going to do this, it's because I deserve better. Not because you feel sorry for me." Daniel nodded, respecting her strength. "Fair enough." As they parted ways, Daniel felt a strange sense of purpose wash over him. For years, he'd lived in isolation, convinced that getting involved in others' problems would only lead to complications. But now, standing on the brink of something bigger than himself, he realized he'd been wrong. Helping someone else didn't weaken him, it made him stronger. And as he walked away, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. But for the first time in a long time, he was ready. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Daniel worked tirelessly, coordinating with lawyers, financial advisors, and the private investigator to build a solid case. Every piece of evidence mattered: bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, emails detailing shady deals, even text messages revealing the husband's true intentions. It was like piecing together a puzzle, except this one had stakes higher than any boardroom negotiation Daniel had ever faced. Meanwhile, the woman, let's call her Lisa, began taking small but significant steps toward reclaiming her life. With Daniel's guidance, she opened a new bank account in her name only, using funds from a family member who still trusted her. She also started attending therapy sessions, something Daniel strongly encouraged. "You've been carrying this weight alone for too long," he told her during one of their meetings. "Let someone help you carry it now." Lisa nodded, though her eyes betrayed lingering doubts. Trust didn't come easily to her anymore, not after years of manipulation and gaslighting. But she appreciated Daniel's calm demeanor and genuine concern. Unlike her husband, who used words as weapons, Daniel spoke with kindness and respect. Over time, she began to trust him not just as an ally, but as a friend. One evening, as they sat in Daniel's office going over documents, Lisa looked up at him suddenly. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me." Daniel paused, considering his answer. He could have said it was because he hated injustice or because he saw potential in her. But the truth was simpler and more personal. "Because I wish someone had done it for me once," he admitted quietly. "When I was younger, I went through something similar. Not exactly the same, but close enough to understand how it feels to be trapped. I survived, but I always wondered what might have happened if someone had stepped in sooner. Lisa stared at him, surprise flickering across her face. She'd assumed Daniel was untouchable, a man who lived in a world far removed from hers. Yet here he was, sharing a part of himself she never expected to see. It made him human, real, and for the first time since meeting him, she felt truly connected to someone outside her own pain. With each passing day, the plan grew more intricate. They decided to act quickly before the husband, let's call him Richard, caught wind of their efforts. The goal was simple: cut off his access to Lisa's finances, secure legal protections for her and the baby, and ensure she had a safe place to stay until everything was finalized. To achieve this, Daniel arranged for a discreet apartment under an alias, stocked with essentials and paid for in cash to avoid detection. But the biggest challenge lay ahead, confronting Richard directly. Daniel knew it wouldn't be easy. Men like Richard thrived on control, and losing it would push him into unpredictable territory. Still, Daniel believed that exposing the truth would force Richard's hand, leaving him no choice but to back. Down. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Richard, unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes, announced plans to host a charity gala at his company's headquarters. It was a high-profile event attended by investors, politicians, and media personalities, the perfect stage for Daniel's play. On the night of the gala, Daniel arrived dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, blending seamlessly into the crowd of elites. His presence drew curious glances. Few recognized him, but those who did whispered about the reclusive billionaire making a rare appearance. Ignoring the murmurs, Daniel scanned the room until he spotted Richard holding court near the bar, laughing loudly with a group of admirers. Timing was everything. As the crowd thinned momentarily, Daniel approached Richard, his expression calm but purposeful. "Mind if I join you?" he asked smoothly, gesturing to the empty space beside him. Richard glanced at him, intrigued by the stranger bold enough to interrupt his moment. "Sure," he replied, extending a hand. "I'm Richard, and you are?" "An interested party," Daniel said, shaking his hand briefly before letting go. He ordered a drink from the bartender, then turned his attention back to Richard. "Your company's done well for itself. Impressive." Richard smirked, clearly enjoying the flattery. "Yeah, we've had our share of success. Hard work pays off, you know." "Oh, I agree," Daniel said, nodding thoughtfully. "But sometimes hard work isn't the only thing paying off." He slid a folder onto the bar between them, its contents neatly organized. "Take a look at this when you get a chance." Curiosity got the better of Richard, and he opened the folder cautiously. At first, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then, as the reality sank in, his expression shifted to panic. The documents inside painted a damning picture, evidence of embezzlement, forged signatures, illegal transfers, all tied directly to him. Worse still, there were screenshots of texts between him and his lawyer discussing plans to frame Lisa as unstable. "What is this?" Richard demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Where did you get this?" "That's not important," Daniel replied coolly. "What matters is what happens next. You can either sign everything over to Lisa tonight, her assets, her trust fund, everything, or I'll make sure this goes public tomorrow morning. Your choice." Richard's face turned red, veins bulging in his neck. For a moment, it looked like he might explode. But Daniel held his ground, his gaze steady and unyielding. Finally, Richard slumped back against the bar, defeated. "Fine," he muttered bitterly, "but you'll regret this." "I doubt it," Daniel said simply, sliding a pen across the counter. "Sign here." As Richard scrawled his name on the dotted line, Daniel felt a surge of satisfaction. It wasn't vengeance he sought, it was justice. And in that moment, justice had been served. Back at the apartment later that night, Lisa listened intently as Daniel explained what had transpired. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of relief. For the first time in years, she felt free. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, looking at him with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Daniel replied with a smile, "by finding your strength again." And as they sat there together, two people bound by shared struggles and newfound hope, Daniel realized something profound. Helping Lisa hadn't just changed her life, it had changed his too. The aftermath of the gala felt like a tidal wave crashing over everyone involved. Richard, humiliated and cornered, tried to salvage whatever scraps of dignity he could. But it was too late. Word spread quickly among the elite circles he once thrived in. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs grew into headlines. By morning, news outlets were buzzing with reports about the scandal surrounding his company. The same charm that had once opened doors for him now worked against him, as people questioned how someone so polished could be capable of such deceit. Richard wasn't the type to go down quietly. He stormed into his lawyer's office early the next day, demanding damage control. "Fix this," he barked, slamming the folder Daniel had given him onto the desk. Inside were copies of all the incriminating documents, enough to bury him if they became public. His lawyer flipped through them, his face growing paler with each page. "This is bad," he muttered finally. "Really bad." "What do you mean bad?" Richard snapped. "You're the expert here. Figure something out?" The lawyer shook his head grimly. "It's not just the evidence, it's who we're dealing with. This guy, whoever he is, he's got resources, connections. Fighting him will only make things worse." Fury burned in Richard's eyes, but beneath it lingered fear. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. All the control he'd wielded over Lisa, all the schemes he'd orchestrated to keep her trapped, all of it was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Meanwhile, Lisa was beginning to adjust to her new reality. With Daniel's help, she'd moved into the safe apartment he'd arranged for her. It was modest compared to the luxurious home she'd shared with Richard, but it felt like freedom. Every creak of the floorboards, every ray of sunlight streaming through the windows, reminded her that she was no longer living under someone else's thumb. But freedom came with challenges. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or paying bills felt overwhelming at first. Years of being cut off from decision-making had left her unsure of herself. Yet, with each small victory, choosing her own meals, setting up utilities in her name, she grew more confident. Therapy sessions helped her unpack the emotional scars Richard had inflicted, teaching her to recognize manipulation tactics and rebuild her self-worth. Daniel checked in regularly, offering support without overstepping. He brought her books on personal finance, encouraged her to explore hobbies she'd abandoned, and even introduced her to a few trusted friends who might offer additional guidance. Their bond deepened over these interactions. What started as an alliance born of necessity evolved into genuine friendship. Lisa admired Daniel's quiet strength and unwavering integrity, while Daniel found himself inspired by Lisa's resilience. One afternoon, as they sat together in the cozy living room of her apartment, Lisa asked a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you think I'll ever trust anyone again? Like, really trust them?" Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "Trust isn't something you lose forever," he said gently. "It's like building a house. You start with one brick, then another. Some days, it feels like you're moving backward. But eventually, you'll have something solid. Something real." Lisa nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She knew healing wouldn't happen overnight. There would be moments of doubt, nights when old fears crept back in. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. Between Daniel's support and her own determination, she felt equipped to face whatever lay ahead. As weeks turned into months, the dust began to settle. Richard's empire unraveled faster than anyone anticipated. Investors pulled out, lawsuits piled up, and his reputation tanked. The man who had once strutted through boardrooms like a king now found himself scrambling to stay afloat. Rumors swirled about him fleeing the country, though no one could confirm it. Either way, he was gone from Lisa's life for good. Lisa, on the other hand, was thriving. With access to her trust fund restored, she took control of her finances and invested wisely. She enrolled in art classes, rediscovering a passion she'd suppressed during her marriage. Most importantly, she embraced motherhood with open arms. When her baby arrived, a healthy boy with wide, curious eyes, she vowed to raise him in a world where love meant kindness, not control. Daniel attended the birth, standing quietly in the hospital room as Lisa held her newborn son for the first time. Watching her cradle the tiny bundle in her arms, tears streaming down her face, he felt a lump rise in his throat. This moment wasn't just hers, it belonged to him too, in a way. Helping her reclaim her life had reignited something within him, reminding him of the joy that comes from connection and purpose. Afterward, as Lisa rested, Daniel stepped outside to clear his head. The city buzzed below, its streets alive with energy. For years, he'd viewed humanity through a lens of cynicism, convinced that people were either predators or prey. But Lisa had changed that perspective. Through her courage and spirit, she showed him that even in the darkest corners of life, light could still shine. When Lisa woke up later, she found Daniel sitting beside her bed, holding a cup of coffee. "I was thinking," he said with a smile, "maybe we should celebrate. A fresh start calls for something special." She laughed softly, exhaustion softening her features. "Like what? Champagne for two? Why not?" Daniel teased. "Though I suppose apple juice might be safer for now." They shared a laugh, the kind that comes from shared triumphs and hard-earned peace. In that moment, neither of them needed grand gestures or declarations. They simply existed together, two people bound by a journey that had transformed them both. And as Lisa gazed at her sleeping baby, then at Daniel sitting across from her, she realized something profound. Life hadn't handed her an easy path, but it had given her something far greater, the chance to rise stronger, wiser, and braver than before. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm for Lisa. The days were no longer filled with dread or uncertainty, but instead with small joys, waking up to her baby's laughter, painting in the sunlight streaming through her window, or taking long walks through the park. She had started rebuilding her life brick by brick, just as Daniel had described. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she thought was lost forever. Her son, whom she named Noah, became the center of her world. He wasn't just a reminder of survival. He was a symbol of hope. Every time he reached for her hand or babbled happily in his crib, Lisa felt a surge of gratitude, not just for him, but for the people who had helped her get here. Daniel, especially, remained a constant presence in her life. Though their relationship stayed platonic, it carried a depth that neither of them had expected when they first met. Daniel, too, was changing in ways he couldn't have predicted. For years he had lived behind walls of solitude, convinced that keeping others at arm's length was the safest way to navigate life. But helping Lisa had cracked those walls open, letting light pour in. Watching her transform from a broken woman into someone strong and self-assured reminded him of his own capacity for growth. Slowly, he began reconnecting with old friends and family members he'd distanced himself from over the years. It wasn't always easy, some wounds ran deep, but each conversation brought him closer to healing. One evening, as they sat together in Lisa's cozy living room, Daniel looked around at the space she'd created. Posters of her artwork adorned the walls, colorful rugs covered the floors, and shelves overflowed with books and toys. The apartment radiated warmth, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile homes he visited during business meetings. "You've done amazing work here," he said, gesturing to the room. "It feels alive." Lisa smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm happy. Really happy. And it's because of you. If you hadn't stepped in, you would have found your way eventually," Daniel interrupted gently. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "Maybe, but having someone believe in me when I didn't believe in myself, that made all the difference." Their bond had grown beyond gratitude. They shared a mutual respect, an understanding forged in hardship and triumph. Yet, despite their closeness, neither of them pushed for more than friendship. There was comfort in the simplicity of their connection, a safe harbor after turbulent seas. As Noah grew older, Lisa decided to use her experiences to help others. She started volunteering at a local shelter for women escaping abusive relationships, offering not just financial advice but also emotional support. Many of the women reminded her of herself, scared, unsure, but desperate for a better future. Seeing their resilience inspired her to keep going, even on days when doubt crept back. Daniel encouraged her every step of the way. "You're giving these women what you needed most," he told her one afternoon as they strolled through the park. "Hope, someone to tell them they're worth fighting for." "I wouldn't have known how to do any of this without you," Lisa replied softly. "You showed me what kindness looks like, and you reminded me why it matters," Daniel countered, his voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes we forget how powerful it is to care about someone else. You've taught me that." The two continued walking side by side, Noah giggling in his stroller as leaves crunched beneath their feet. It was a simple moment, yet it carried so much weight. Both of them understood that life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but they had learned to find beauty in its imperfections. Eventually, Lisa decided to take things a step further. With Daniel's guidance, she launched a foundation aimed at helping victims of financial abuse regain control of their lives. The project quickly gained traction, drawing attention from media outlets and philanthropists alike. Donations poured in, allowing the foundation to expand its reach and impact. Lisa stood at the helm, leading with compassion and determination. At the foundation's launch event, held in a modest community center, Lisa delivered a speech that left the audience in tears. "When I was at my lowest point," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat, "I didn't think I'd make it out. But then someone stepped in, a stranger who saw me when I couldn't see myself. That act of kindness saved my life, and now I want to pay it forward." As she spoke, her eyes met Daniel's across the room. He nodded slightly, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. In that moment, they both knew the ripple effect of their actions would extend far beyond what either of them could imagine. Life moved on, carrying them along different paths but always connected by the journey they'd shared. Lisa thrived as a mother, advocate, and artist, while Daniel embraced a new chapter of his own. His empire continued to flourish, but he no longer measured success solely by numbers. Instead, he found fulfillment in the lives he touched, in the friendships he nurtured, and the humanity he rediscovered. Years later, sitting on a bench overlooking the city skyline, Lisa turned to Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder where we'd be if none of this had happened? If we hadn't crossed paths that day?" Daniel chuckled softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Honestly, I try not to think about it, because whatever twists fate took to bring us here, I'm glad it did." Lisa nodded, leaning back against the bench. The sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the buildings. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed, cars honked, and life buzzed on as usual. But for Lisa and Daniel, the noise faded into the background. All that mattered was the quiet peace they'd fought so hard to achieve. In the end, their story wasn't just about survival or redemption. It was about connection, the kind that transcends circumstances and changes lives forever. And as they sat there together, watching the city glow under the setting sun, they knew they'd been given something rare and precious, a second chance.